Firstly, thank you so much for coming today to the Green Party Hustings. It makes a real difference to see so many people here challenging the views of the potential MPs for Bath. A few quick explaining about what's going to happen today. The candidate will have 5 minutes to outline his key points and why he's running and sort of his views on issues. We'll then go on to 20 minutes of pre-prepared questions about student issues, which every candidate will be facing this election. And then finally, it'll be over to you, where you can ask any question you want to the candidate. We ask that when you do these questions, obviously, I'll pick you one or two at a time, or decide at a time. Please be brief. Don't do more than don't ask more than one question, and you have no right to reply. So if he says something, even if you disagree with it, don't try and talk back to him, because that's just not how it's going to work today. So we aim to finish this by about 8:30. So if anyone's got any commitments, that's roughly when we have to end this. So I think, without further ado, I'd like to invite Dominic to stand. So yeah, here, I suppose.
Right, thank you. Now, can everyone hear me? This works, brilliant. Now, I've got 5 minutes at the start to just go through and introduce the party and stuff. So what I'm going to do, if you don't mind, is just not talk about policy too much, but just have a sort of brief introduction, because we'll cover policy, I'm sure, in the questions. Can I just ask people quickly, straw poll, who thinks they're well-informed on politics? Hands up, yeah. Cool. Now, keep your hands up if you think you're pretty sure you know where all the parties lie on a sort of left-right spectrum. Oh, more hands have gone up, okay. Now, okay, so who thinks they know where the Green Party lies on the left-right spectrum? Okay, and keep your hand up if you think we lie to the left of the Conservatives, and to the left of the Lib Dems, and to the left of Labour. Okay, interesting. Now, if we have the first slide, please. Now, I don't know how many people have seen this before. This is the political compass. Go to this website, it's brilliant. You answer a load of questions. It will plot where you are, left, right, authoritarian, libertarian. Now, here's Green. Here are all the other parties. Who is surprised at that plot? Absolutely nobody. Okay, that's brilliant. Because, I mean, a lot of the time people say to me, oh, you know, you're quite like Labour, aren't you? You're all left-wing. Labour is not left-wing, really. And you see that in all sorts of policy announcements that they come out with. If we go to the next slide, I said we're not going to talk about policy, but we're going very briefly. So here are some things we believe, and here are some things, well, nobody else believes. So some things you might consider left-wing, like nationalising the railways. We're the only party that wants that. We're the only party that's against TTIP and against austerity generally. So that's where we lie. You know, this, I would say, is probably in line with much more of the public than people think. The public, we think, and in fact we know from, and I'll talk about that in a second, is more left-wing. And I say left-wing in a very, I mean, I hate left-right-wing, but it's just a helpful label, as you saw on that compass. It's more to the left, certainly financially, than the mainstream political parties would have you think. So our policies tend to chime with people quite a lot, and that's not just me saying that. If we go to the next slide, this is a poll. This is another brilliant website that you should all go to if you haven't gone to before, voteforpolicies.org. Basically, it shows you all the policies of all the parties, but it doesn't tell you which party they're for, and then you choose the one you like the most, or the one you agree with the most. And it tells you who you should vote for, basically. This is for Bath. This was actually, it's changed a bit now. This is when they first released the 2015 quiz. So it's a bit different now, but it's more or less still us ahead. Brilliant. And isn't that brilliant? I mean, 36% of the people in Bath will prefer the Green Party for policies. Way more than the actual incumbent, which is the Lib Dems. So, brilliant, we should have a Green MP. And I should also say, actually this is pretty much national as well. If you go to the Vote for Policy site, you can do per constituency, or you can do for the whole country. And the whole country, certainly at the last general election, we were well ahead. As in, not quite 36%, but we were ahead of, I think, Labour, who was second. So why don't we have a Green government? Why do people not vote for the policies they actually like the most? Let's go to the next slide. This might tell you something. This is the amount of money that each party spent at the last general election. Obviously, these guys have tons of money, and we don't really have much at all. Now, why is that? Why don't we have loads of money if we've got the best policies? Well, it's because we refuse money from people who don't pay their taxes, or people who are unethical, or people who are just a bit shifty in some way. We've got to, I mean, if you go to our website, there's a whole bunch, we have a very strong ethical policy. And I don't want to go through it all right now because it's very long, but basically it means there's not much money we accept. We even refuse money from people who have legally not paid tax. There was a big story in the news a couple of years ago. I say big, if you're into the Green Party it is, about we handed back quite a huge, like 20,000, 30,000 pounds, a lot of money for us. To put this into perspective, this is about 300,000 pounds. So if we go to the next slide, what's going to happen in this election? Well, this is funding this is the most recent figures we have. This is funding to all the parties last year. For some reason, some of these haven't come out, but you might be able to guess that this one is Labour and this one's UKIP. So, we often hear from certain other parties how they've got no money and they're not the big boys and they don't take money from millionaires and stuff. They do. They all do. We don't. This might sound like a very long excuse of why we don't get more MPs, but the sad fact is that you can have the best policies, and I think we do, and polling does show that people do agree with us most, but money buys elections. This just, I mean, it illustrates it so well because actually this is more or less how people vote. So for every sort of leaflet you get from Ben Howlett, the Tory candidate, through your door, for every one of ours, he can buy, I don't know, 50, who knows, some huge amounts anyway. And you might have read recently that the Conservatives are spending hundreds of thousands a week on Facebook adverts and things. Just to put another thing into perspective.
So Dom, I have to ask you closing remarks. 5
Okay.
minutes over.
I don't want this whole thing to be about money, but all our money is from members. And all our money is from people who believe in what we say, not people. We believe if you take money to your political party to make policy, you are corrupt. These parties are corrupt because they take money from people who buy policy. So this is what we want to change. This is why we want state funding for political parties, which is something I can talk about if you want to talk about. And this is why we need people like you, or let's hope people like you who agree with us to actually join us, because all the money comes from members. And we think that's the only way you can really run a democratic political party.
That's it. Thank you. So I'm now going to go on to our prepared questions. So the first question is, with high housing and transport costs, living in Bath is expensive for students. What do you do to address this on a local and national level?
Okay, living in Bath is expensive for everyone, I have to say that. I don't know how many people of you know the statistics for average earnings in the southwest, or in fact nationally, but certainly the southwest, and house prices. In Bath, we've got some of the lowest average earnings, but some of the highest house prices. So that's not to say it's not a problem for students, but it's a problem for everyone. What we would do, I mean, there's two aspects of this. I'm not going to pretend that as MP I could do anything about what the council says. We would obviously like to elect some councillors. But nationally, what we would like to do is be quite harsh on the people who are basically milking the system when it comes to rents. We have a big problem with people who buy large amounts of property. And we have a big problem with people who take money from the state through things like housing benefit and use it to enrich themselves. We would bring in rent caps, rent controls, and we would also end the very favourable tax terms that buy-to-let landlords have. Because really, the reason you will pay a lot of money in rent is because it's a money-making scheme for people. It's their career. You know, people go. I've lived in Bath a long time. I've lived in Bath 15 years now, and I've lived in shared houses. When I first moved here, I lived in student houses, and we'd be shown around houses, and the landlord would say, "Oh, don't tell them you're looking to live here, because just say you're from the gas board, and because I don't want them to know I'm going to chuck them out." And you think, this is a guy who boasted to us that he had 15 houses and didn't have to work and paid very little tax. How is it right that that guy is doing that? And he basically is in I wouldn't say a monopoly. He's not a monopolist because obviously lots of people own houses, but it's a, I forget the word. What's the word? They all get together. It's a big sort of cooperative group of landlords who agree how much they're going to charge, more or less, and that's what they charge. And they'll charge as much as the market will bear. And the market will bear a lot, and the market will bear more as you get larger and larger loans, because they know that back in the day when people didn't have loans, they didn't know how much money you had. When I was a student, rents were pretty reasonable. I was paying the equivalent of probably about £300 a month or something. I don't know. But and I see the eye-watering rents now. And it's because they know that everyone gets the loans, these loans, you know, and they know that you've got that money, and so they'll charge what they can. And they know there are probably more people looking for houses in Bath than there are houses. So what would we do? We would limit through tax incentives or disincentives the number of properties landlords can own. The more landlords there are, I mean, we're not against people being landlords because you need that. Certainly for students, you can't all go and buy houses. But what we are against is a very small number of landlords owning a lot of houses. We want to see that sort of spread between more landlords and getting a proper sort of competitive market in there. And also, I'm going to sort of, I don't know how much you want me to cover the long term, because obviously we have national policy that will sort this out long term. We have, for example, we're going to get rid of student fees and we're going to reintroduce maintenance grants and that sort of thing so people have more money. But also in the long term, we're going to sort out, as say, the rental market. We're going to build more houses. At the moment, you are competing with everyone else who wants a house in Bath. You know, your buy-to-let landlord is competing against people who want to buy a house to live in. Now, that just drives up prices, and if it drives up prices for the landlords to buy student houses, then it drives up your rents. So the way to do that is make sure that we get rid of some of this housing shortage, which is why we're going to build 500,000 houses in the next, till 2020, before 2020, which I will talk about. I heard somebody giggling. We will talk about the figures. But, you know, you've got to have, there's no point saying, you know, parties will stand here and say, oh, it's terrible, isn't it? It's terrible, what are we going to do? Oh, it's terrible. And they'll not actually have any policies. They'll just sort of, they might knock other people's policies, but they won't have any solutions. So one thing we like to do as a party, and I don't know how many of people have looked on our website, we've got, I don't know, hundreds of policies, and we always have, and they're all public, and they're fully open to scrutiny. This does mean we get some stick for them, but at the same time we have them. You know, how many other parties have any policies at all that you can criticise? I wouldn't want to sort of, you know, have a go at any particular party, but some of them do get away with just blaming everything on, I don't know, the EU or something. But that's no good, because actually when it comes to a general election, you've got to say what you're going to do. So yes, we're going to say some things that not everyone believes, and then we'll get questioned about finances and stuff, but we have policies. We say what we want to do. Now, realistically, and I say this, I don't want to sound like self-defeating, we're not going to form the next government. So actually, when people say to us, oh, how are you going to build those houses? Realistically, this is an aspiration we would have if we had those MPs, but we will be in Parliament pushing for more houses and pushing for all the things we believe. So really, to criticise the Green Party for not fully costing, we are going to fully cost our manifesto, but to criticise us in some way for, you know, saying, oh, how are you going to pay for that? And then, you know, having our leader who, I will not defend some of her interviews.
So Doc, you can make your closing remarks there on this question.
Oh, right, sorry, I'm running out of time. So I'm going to go back to students before I go off on a huge tangent. So yeah, there are, you know, we would actually want universities to build more on-campus accommodation as well. We would very much pressure them to do so. And also we would...
So I'm going to go on to the next question now. Oh. We are quite hard
Sorry.
time. Sorry about that. So the next question is our job market. So students are increasingly looking to improve their chances in job markets. What are your policies to ensure students are well equipped so that they can get jobs post-graduation? Okay, so realistically, as an MP, that's an interesting question. What could I do to make sure students are well equipped? Well, not a lot to some extent. I mean, what we would say is the universities, what we do have is a policy to actually have much more of a view on what universities are doing. We want to be much stricter on judging who is awarding degrees and the quality of those degrees. This isn't to say that we would reduce the number of degrees, but at the moment, not all degrees are equal between institutions. Now, you guys are in a good university, right, so you're not worried about that too much. But you probably get quite annoyed when the degree you worked really hard for is somehow belittled by, I don't know, politicians, other students, whatever, saying, oh, what's that Mickey Mouse degree? We don't believe any degree should be a Mickey Mouse degree, and actually, I don't think many are. I think there is an unpleasant number of comments you get on people criticising what they consider as Mickey Mouse or arts degrees. And I have no problem with arts degrees, and we need people with arts degrees just as much as we need people with science degrees. But what would we do to make sure they get jobs? I think the thing is less to do with what we do at university and less about controlling what the university does and more about the environment that people come into after university. One thing we would definitely do is make sure that nobody has to work for free and nobody has to work for less than a living wage.
It's absolutely outrageous at the moment. You can get a degree and then you can go and be an intern somewhere and you pay almost nothing. Absolutely outrageous. We've made that illegal. If somebody works and does a full-time job, they should get paid a wage. Now, what we think is that the minimum wage should be a living wage. So another aspiration we have is by 2020 we want to make that £10 an hour. That doesn't sound like a lot, and in fact that isn't a lot. And just to put it into perspective, when I graduated end of the 90s, mid 2000s, when I came to Bath, the average starting salary for a graduate in IT, which is what I work in, was about £25,000. It's now £23,000. I mean, what sort of world is this where people are being paid less now than they were 15 years ago? And that's because of a whole bunch of things. It's pay disparity, it's pressure on companies, well, the lack of pressure on companies to actually pay people a decent wage. And so now we see people who've got good jobs and can't afford houses. So what would we do? I mean, we would just basically incentivize companies through tax and through, well, general government pressure to pay people a decent wage. You know, we see now companies making more profits than they ever have, and yet they pay people less and less. So that means graduates would have at least enough to live on when they get their first job. We would also encourage universities to work with companies. And one of the things which we might cover when we talk about student fees and abolishing them is how we would actually introduce a tax on the largest companies. Not just a tax to pay for the students, but also make them integrate with the universities to an extent and get students learning what they actually need to learn to work with those companies. It's not the same as having universities as a sort of training ground for companies. That's not what we want at all. University isn't about learning how to be a worker. University is about knowledge. But at the same time, we need companies to work with universities and actually identify what they need. And
are there questions at this point, comments from the audience about what Dom has just said about, specifically the graduate market? Yes, at the front.
Yeah.
Given that the Greens policy is to end economic growth, how on earth is there going to be a decent graduate jobs market?
Our economic policy isn't to end economic growth. Our economic policy is a steady state economy. It is a nonsense to talk about infinite economic growth in a closed system. It's a nonsense. Everyone knows that's a nonsense. So the parties that pretend that is going to be true are lying to you. And they're lying because in the end they work in 5-year electoral cycles. Whereas we're the only party that actually thinks about the future to any real extent. You can't, it is meaningless to talk about infinite growth. Meaningless. Now, a steady state economy isn't something to be afraid of. A steady state economy is actually perfectly sensible. There's no real reason for you, once you've got what you need to live comfortably, why does it matter how rich everyone is? I mean, you might get richer in comparison to your neighbour, and that's fine, because that gives you the incentive to get a better job or whatever, and buy a nicer house and all these other things that people think of as economy. But everyone getting richer, once everyone's got enough to live, what is the meaning of that, really? I mean, feel free to. This is good.
I think actually we might move on to the next question now, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Timings.
Okay.
So the next question is about political apathy. Students are a huge section of the constituency, yet turnout remains very low. How do you re-engage young people into politics?
Okay, so if we can. Oh, my slides are. I've got a couple of slides about this. If you go to the one that says youth engagement. Right. Oh, that one. Yeah. Great. So. As we are the most popular party with people from 16 to 24. That is shown in pretty much every poll. Why is that? Well, as I say, we think about the future. You know, to have a party that actually says maybe we should consider the environment and we should consider, you know, what we release into the atmosphere as part of what we do in every other aspect of policy. That's forward thinking. Whereas some other parties might go, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it will cost money. It doesn't matter. We put more weight on things which are what we need in the long term. Now that comes out in all sorts of ways. Here is our youth manifesto. So one of the ways we appeal to the younger voters is to basically not ignore them. Lots of parties ignore the youth vote. We actually have a completely separate manifesto. The Young Greens, by the way, are anyone under the age of 30. We have the largest youth wing of any political party. I won't go into what that says. It's all online, so you can have a read. But if we go to the next slide. This is another very important thing. Here I am, talking to students in Bath at the fees and anti-fees demo. I was the only politician to go. You know, how many parties talk about caring about the youth vote, and then what do they do? I mean, I'm quite happy to come and speak to and march and stand with students, because I think it's absolutely vital. Not just students, but all young people. But it's absolutely vital to be seen to care about them, and I do. I mean, I was a student for a long time. I was a student for 7 years, and I still feel like one in many ways. And what else do we do? Things like this. I mean, this, I think, will probably ring a bell with everyone in Bath. Bath is quite bad when it comes to pay disparity between the wealthiest and the poorest. Fair pay campus, you know, nobody should earn 10 times what the lowest person earns. This is, you know, again, branded Green Party stuff. We're actually there talking about these issues. Now, it might not matter, well, it might be easy to think these things don't affect you as a student, but of course they do. Because actually, if you're studying at a university where there's people being paid massive disparities between the people who are paid lots and the people who aren't paid much, then that's going to come through in all sorts of ways, whether that's the sort of motivation of your teachers or lecturers, or you know, just how the people who are at the very senior level, how much they care about their pay and how much they care about the university. All of these things.
Just stop you there, Dominic. Is there anyone from the audience who has anything to say about that? Someone else, sorry, just give us a chance. Oh, no one cares. You got a big job ahead of you then, God, carry on.
So it is important, and you know, and it's important for us because it's not just universities. We are about how equality generally in society, and pay inequality. And I'm not going to say too much about that now in this youth park, because I'm going off on a bit of a tangent. But inequality is one of the worst things that actually, and an increasing problem in our society. And it's going to lead to all sorts of issues, especially for you guys when you're out looking for jobs, because it affects your pay and everything else. If we go on to the next slide, might as well use this last one. So here we go. This is a little bit old now. We've actually corrected the head of Labour now. So we're polling pretty well with young people, and also in Bath, you've probably all seen the poll that Bath Impact did, where we are leading, which is good. Now, the trouble with young people, and I say that sounding slightly patronising, is actually, of all the age groups, there's not, you know, people registered to vote, not so many. I can't remember what it is here, but generally nationwide, you get about 50% turnout with this age group, which isn't brilliant, especially when they're your core supporters as they are with us. So it really is something we're trying to do. We're trying to engage young people. This is why we're pushing for things like votes at 16, not just because it would be good for us, but because actually it would be good for democracy. At 16, you can do all sorts of things, and so why shouldn't you have a voice democratically? People say 16-year-olds, what do they know about the world? Yeah, but they can go and, well, at 17, they can go and fight in wars and get killed for the country, but they can't vote for the politicians. I mean, that's not right. So politics is everywhere, and politics is important to everyone, and especially the young, because actually you guys are going to be alive longer than me. You guys are going to be alive for a long, long time, and you'll be suffering from some of the policies that politicians are making now. So it's absolutely in your interest to have a say.
Yeah, sure, yeah, at the back.
Hi. Do you think it helps to engage young people when they see the kind of conversation that I saw on the Facebook event for this earlier, where you've got politicians engaging in basically mudslinging over various political, do you think that makes people want to engage with politics, or do you think that makes people go, actually, I'm not interested in anything that anyone's got to say?
It's an interesting one. It is a constant source of debate in the Green Party, whether we should engage in something that people call negative campaigning. I hate to quote things. What that means is basically having a go at other politicians. Now, for a very long time, we decided that actually negative campaigning is something we didn't want to do, because it just doesn't, well, it's negative, right? It's got to be bad from the name. It has, since we changed our mind slightly on that, our membership has gone up 5 times. So you might be right. Some people might not like seeing it, but it's been really good for us to start having a go at other policies. And I don't know if that's a good thing, and I'm not saying it is a good thing, but because we get all our money from membership, it has meant we're now able to contest every seat at the general election. If we hadn't had that huge boost in membership, we wouldn't be able to do that, and people wouldn't be able to vote for us even if they wanted to, which is not really great for democracy. Now, I'm willing to admit that I can be riled into having to replying to people when they say stupid things, or when they, or when they're trolls, or and it's something I have to try and rein in. I have to say, but it bothers me that people aren't hearing the truth, and I will. If somebody comes on and just basically says something that isn't true, I do feel I have to point out that it's not true, and I'll try and do that in a polite way. Where I probably go wrong is if they then come back and just say, "Oh, you're rubbish. I should just let it go." That's a failing, right? I'm only human. But if we didn't point out the flaws in other parties' policies, so some things people just wouldn't know. So we can sit and say in a positive campaign, isn't it terrible that the NHS is being privatised? We'll stop it. And people say to us, it's not being privatised. And so you have to say, well, actually, the Lib Dems and Tories are doing this, this, and this. And that's terrible, because otherwise, our sort of positive message people go, well, what's that mean? It's not, what are they talking about? We've kind of got to have a slight dig at the other parties. What we would never do, and what other parties sometimes do, is come out with these rubbish statistics. Like you'll see stuff come through from other parties where there's like some bar chart saying, oh, the Greens can't win here because it's either us or them, and they'll miss people out, or they'll just say it's from some other election or something. We use bar charts, but we do always say where they're from. We always have a source, and we always, obviously they're the ones that favour us, but we're not doctoring those charts at all. We're not saying other people can't win. All we're saying is we can win. And I think that's refreshing. I mean, it's refreshing. I hear on the doorstep people like that, because they get fed up with other parties telling them, oh, you might not like us, but hey, it's us or those other guys, so vote for us because we're the less bad ones. I mean, that's not what people want. So in that sense, we're positive in that we're saying these are our policies. This is why we think those other guys are bad. But actually, in Bath, I genuinely think anyone can win. And nationally, we're not pretending we're going to make the government. I mean, I'm not going to say to you we're going to form the government, but we could well be in some sort of coalition or arrangement with another government, with a minority government. So
thank you, Dom. Can I stop you there? That's right.
Okay.
So we go on to the final prepared question now, which is, with the UK graduate job market, it's heavily focused in London right now. Few remaining university cities like Bath remain sort of prosperous for students. How would you improve the quality and quantity of graduate jobs in the UK?
Right. Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because one thing that definitely doesn't help is lots of jobs going abroad. Now, that's not going to become a UKIP-style rant. What I would suggest is we look at the huge amounts of money that is spent by our government and our civil service. And I've done a lot of work. I work in IT, as I think I said. And a lot of the work I did was bidding for government contracts. Now, lots of UK companies are doing that. And also lots of non-UK companies are doing that. And lots of companies that aren't really based anywhere for tax reasons. And what you see is you go into these this government bidding process, and I used to work for a company called IPL in Bath, which is the largest software company, largest independent software company in the UK. And just to put that in perspective, that's only sort of 250 people, because pretty much everyone is Capita or Atos or all these other guys now. And we'd go in, and we employed UK graduates. We did a milk round still, which is pretty old-fashioned these days, but we'd come to Bath. Lots of people who set up IPL were Bath graduates. And we trained people, we gave them a career. And so we're in bidding for this government work, which was the lifeblood of the company. And you'd get other companies, who shall remain nameless, coming in and undercutting us for the work, because they're all going to offshore it, or they're going to pay people almost nothing. And we ended up competing against companies that would do something, and I will warn you about the companies like this, because they're terrible. There are companies who will offer you training. They'll say, and these are graduates, these are UK graduates, they'll say, we'll train you up for free in whatever it is, and that training is going to cost you £20,000, but you won't have to pay it as long as you work for us wherever we decide for the next 2 years. Now this is, I think, almost a form of slavery, because most people can't pay back that £20,000. These guys will be sent in to government contracts where they're earning almost nothing, because they've got this debt they've got to pay. And so the graduate market just gets completely decimated. All the companies are still charging almost as much money, but it's all going to a few guys who are, I don't know, based in Switzerland or something. So what we would do is we'd end shady practices like that. Nobody should be compelled to work. All these sort of slightly false mechanisms to get people to either avoid tax or avoid paying people a decent wage aren't fair, and they actually work against all of you. As I say, unpaid internships. You know, what's that about? Nobody should be doing those. So all it means is a lot of work, as I say, goes to these big outsourcing firms who can afford to do all these things with their whizzy financial instruments. And we would really crack down. We would say government work should go to people who have an ethical set of policies, and also they should, well, certainly pay all their taxes. And we would favour companies that employ UK graduates, not exclusively, because there's a whole lot of European laws that you can't get, you know, that you shouldn't get around. But the spirit of the law is quite different to the way that the law is used at the moment. Everyone from any European country should have an equal chance, of course, but what we don't want to see is everyone being equally taken advantage of. And that's what's happening at the moment.
Thank you. Are there any questions specifically on this issue from the audience at this point? No. Okay, what we're going to do now then is... Oh, we'll have...
Yeah, thanks. On jobs,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about TTIP, which is something the Green Party obviously criticises a lot. Yeah, it still has the potential to create a lot of jobs, which is still, I guess, the main reason people go to university. So for all its faults, do you not feel like if we weren't a part of TTIP, we would be missing out?
Well, I would question the fundamental assumption there that it would create jobs. You know, we're told it will. We're told it will by the people who are supporting it as an idea, but also the people who support it as an idea love free trade. Now, perhaps it will create jobs. I struggle to see how it would, though, because what TTIP would do is basically reduce things like tariffs and different laws in different countries and all that sort of thing. Assuming that that trade happens now, but with some sort of cost on those tariffs, and they want to remove that cost, how would that create jobs? I mean, it's a rhetorical question, really, because, I mean, I can't see how that's true. If anything, it will cost jobs, because at the moment, there's people whose job is dealing with red tape, right? Now, that might not be great, but they've got jobs. It's like all these things. Whenever I'm always immediately suspicious when the people pushing for a change in the law are the people who have the most money. It sounds like some sort of conspiracy theory, but I'm just really wary, because actually the stuff that TTIP would allow, like, you know, for companies suing governments and making sure that we can't renationalise things we want to renationalise if that's what the democratically elected government wants. You know, to be honest, even if it does create some jobs, I'm not sure it's a good deal. And that's why we're against TTIP, and we're against TTIP entirely. You know, absolutely, not just a bit of it, but all of it. Does that answer your question?
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to move to questions from the floor. So raise your hand, I'll put you two at a time and then answer them. Like, remember, only one question and keep them brief. So we'll have the checkered shirt at the front to begin with, and then the, I don't know how to describe that, jumper, the grey jumper at the front, polka dot one. In that order, yeah.
Thank you. This was inevitably going to happen, and I wanted to ask you about the housing policy of the Greens. So UK total spending by the government each year is around £700 billion, of which education is £90 billion and welfare is £109 billion. Assuming you want to build 500,000 houses at a cost of around £200,000, this works out at £100 billion. This is a seventh of the UK's spending each year. How on earth is the Green Party going to fund this kind of major construction?
Well, firstly, they won't cost £200,000. We actually have a convenient slide. If you go to the one that's got a picture of a house on it, basically. There we go. So, trendy infographic, really awful colours for a slide, so I do apologise. I don't know if you can read it. So basically, yes, we do want to build 500,000 houses by 2020. Now, that sounds expensive, doesn't it? And it is partly expensive, but we reckon we can get £60,000 because, let's face it, the government owns a lot of land. By far, the majority of the cost of buying a house is the land. If you don't have to buy the land, and let's face it, the MOD owns a lot of land. In fact, just even in Bath, there's whole bunches of land the MOD's currently got that isn't using. So we reckon you can build for £60,000. So that's 30 billion over the 5 years, which is a lot of money. It is a lot of money. But of that 30 billion, and I'm kind of just reading it, but I'll try and avoid it, 7.5 billion is already in the budget, so that's already some gone. And the rest we raised by abolishing subsidies to buy-to-let landlords. So again, the money is there. You know, people say, oh, how can you possibly spend £200,000 a house? My house didn't cost £200,000. I mean, to think that we would build £500,000, £200,000 houses is a dodgy assumption at the best. You know, and these, I say houses, there'll be flats, there'll be one-bedroom flats, there'll be two-bedroom flats. These are, you know, social housing. So generally, look at the bedroom tax. I mean, it's a very bad thing, but what it has proved, if anything, is there's a massive shortage of very small properties. Because people are being basically punished for living in a three-bedroom house, and they're told you must move to a smaller house. And there aren't any smaller ones. So there's a massive shortage of them. So basically, we'll be building a lot of smaller houses. Or flats.
I don't think you quite answered the question. How do you think you'd actually raise the 30 billion then, even if it is less than what was originally estimated?
Well, as I say, 7.5 billion already there, so we don't need to raise that. And the rest will be raised by abolishing subsidies to buy-to-let landlords.
Thank you.
So basically, we're going to stop giving money to people who are investing in property as an investment, and just use it to build houses. You have to remember that at the moment, by far, and I can't exactly remember what it is, but it's something like 80% of the money that goes to social housing. It doesn't go to building housing. It goes to paying private landlords in housing benefit. So that's an ongoing cost. If you build the houses, then that money stops. You know, they don't get that money anymore. So you're basically investing, and over the long term, you'll obviously save a lot of money.
Thank you. We'll go for the next question then.
Yeah, so long-time voter, first-time hustler. Yeah, and I've always voted for you based on your environmental policy and energy policy, and you haven't really covered that. And I like your policy for getting, you know, such a ridiculous amount of wind. Like, that's a good one. But why do you still not back nuclear when, like, the low cost, it is a low cost, well, relatively low cost, relatively low carbon energy source that is just, can be a good base for the renewables that because we can't rely on renewables alone because it's not a reliable source.
I get what you're saying. I would dispute the low cost part. If anything, what we've seen in Hinckley, I don't know how many people are even aware of what's going on just down the road in Somerset, but they're basically building some more capacity in Hinckley. That's having to be guaranteed by the government, massively subsidised by the government. So the electricity is much more expensive there. Basically, they're guaranteeing a price to EDF and the Chinese for that electricity for like 30 years, so it's going to be easily the most expensive electricity that we're going to have. Not only that, but it's going to take 15 years or something to build. I know, a hell of a long time. I would suggest that is not going to solve anything in the short term, and it's not going to solve anything cheaply. Now, I often get told that the Green Party opposes nuclear power. That's not entirely true. What the Green Party opposes is current nuclear technology. We are actually very pro-research and getting something that's cleaner and cheaper. Now, I would have absolutely no problem at all with nuclear fusion that has, you know, I mean, you laugh, but right, I'm just saying that is an important point. We're not against nuclear technology, we're against polluting, expensive technology. Now, why has this happened? You know, we're often told, oh, we've got to build it because all these things that, you know, we're going to blackouts and all that sort of stuff. The only reason this has happened is because we privatised our energy supply. You privatise something, there's no incentive for the people who own those things to build more power stations or more capacity or upgrade the grid. And what we're seeing now is that after years of sitting there making huge profits off us all, they're going, oh no, there's no generation, we didn't build any. And then they expect the taxpayer, which is us, to come in and guarantee the French and the Chinese state companies, I have to say, to do this, because all our state stuff was sold off to the private sector, and then I don't know what they did with it, lost all the nuclear technicians or something. I mean, the whole thing's ridiculous. So I would also, going back to your point, dispute that we can't actually get a decent energy supply from renewables. there are two fundamental things we've got to do. One is we've got to be much more energy efficient. And we can easily do that by changing the building codes to make houses much more energy efficient. Our houses are some of the worst in Europe, by a long way. So it sounds like a magic bullet, but actually it is a bit of a magic bullet because it's very cheap to insulate houses when you build them, very cheap. And you'll save, again, it's an investment. Also, we would roll out a program of insulation on existing houses. But also what we really want to do is upgrade the grid. Whatever happens in the future, and this isn't just us saying this, anyone who knows about the energy market will tell you this, distributed energy is going to happen. Whatever, whether it's small-scale renewables or it's gas-fired or whatever. The grid is creaking and old because it hasn't been invested in. If you invest in the grid, which is an expensive thing and it has to be done on the public purse, then you enable a whole load of very clever things like smart meters and smart grids to happen. So there are some things where, say, your fridge or your freezer will just come on at night or something because actually it's well enough insulated that it will stay cold during the day. Lots of things like that. Sounds like science fiction. Technology exists now. We could do that. There will be a cost to it. Of course there will be a cost to it. But actually, if you don't bite the bullet and take that cost, then you're just going to, even if you build a nuclear power station every year for the next however long, it's still good. People are going to use more and more energy. And actually, ultimately, nuclear power isn't renewable and isn't sustainable.
Thank you. I'll stop you there and then we'll get some more questions if that's okay.
Yeah.
Can we have the man at the back and then the person in the yellow jumper?
Thank you very much. I'd just like to bring up an issue that I don't really think gets discussed in these sorts of things, which is one of foreign policy and the world in which we live. I was taking a look through your website and the manifesto from last time. Is the green view of the world, is it terrifically optimistic or is it woefully naive? Thank you.
I guess that depends to some extent on your viewpoint. And I couldn't honestly answer because we don't know until something happens, right? I like to think we're optimists because I think you really need to be an optimist. Because if you assume the worst, then you're going to pay a lot of money and worry a lot about things that might never happen. When it comes to foreign policy, I mean, I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but like our policy to scrap Trident, for example. The chances of us being in a situation when we're attacked with nuclear weapons are so vanishingly small that 100 billion over the next 20 or 30 years is just a massive waste of money. We could save so many more lives spending that 100 billion on the NHS or something. So that sort of foreign policy side of things. Yes, I guess we're optimistic, but no sane person would ever use Trident. I mean, I've been in debates specifically about Trident, and to try and pin the other party, all the other parties support Trident, to try and pin them down on when they would actually ever use it. I mean, they can't even think of a scenario where they would. So I would say that's a ridiculous policy. When it comes to other things with foreign policy, I don't know if you're thinking about anything specific. I mean, we've got policies like we want to leave NATO. I don't know if you're thinking about that one. We want to leave NATO because we're not actually against international cooperation. In fact, we're very much for international cooperation. But NATO is the wrong international cooperation. It's very much based on a military mindset. Now, of course, you could say, well, of course it is, because it's a military pact. But actually, it's military in a very sort of reactive way. And actually, what we would support is that there's an organisation called the Organisation for European Security Cooperation, or something, I can't remember exactly. We want that model, really, where actually we preempt problems and we have not just a military sort of reaction, but even though it's a military organisation, more or less, it has also a sort of going in, helping where there's trouble brewing, sort of peacekeeping role to a certain extent, like the UN, which we also want to strengthen. We would like to see the wealthy nations putting much more into the UN. So we're not against internationalism at all, but what we are against is being part of an organisation which is seen, rightly or wrongly, and I'm not saying NATO hasn't done things in the past. In the Cold War, it was a perfectly sensible organisation, but actually now, its time has passed, we think. There isn't much to be gained from us being in a bloc which is basically run, and this might be controversial, by the Americans. But it is, more or less. They put so much into it. And they're actually telling us now that actually we're not putting enough into it. We've been told we have to put 2% of GDP into our military. So that's something we haven't elected, telling us to do that. This is where you've got to start worrying about the organisations you're in. So equally, and We don't agree with the Security Council in the UN. We don't think we should be on the Security Council, but we don't think anyone should be on the Security Council. Why do the victors of the Second World War get to agree on, have a veto on all sorts of international decisions? It just doesn't make sense. It might be good for us, and it might make us feel important, but us feeling important is a cause of a lot of disquiet in the world.
Thanks for that. Next question, please.
Hi. What would be your kind of views on political reforms, like voting changes, or generally within Parliament and the government?
Oh, well, loads. Obviously, people say we're biased because we're a small party, but we really, really like electoral reform. We really want PR. All of our internal elections are done by STV, single transferable vote. It's just, if you talk to any organisation that's concerned with democracy and accountability, and you say, we have an organisation, doesn't matter what it is, and we want to elect somebody, what system is the fairest? They'll always say pretty much STV or some other form of PR. So if that's true, and everyone kind of knows that's true, and when they set up new bodies like the Scottish Parliament or the EU or something, and you know, it generally comes to some form of PR, if that's generally accepted, which it seems to be, why do we have a different system for Westminster? The answer, of course, is that the system we have very much favours the incumbent large parties. You know, it comes to some, you know, we have one MP at the moment in the House of Commons, which is obviously, there's 600 odd MPs, so that's a very small percentage. Way less than our percentage of the vote. And you just wait, this next coming election, UKIP are going to go crazy, because they're going to, you know, they're going to be really annoyed that they only still get like 2 MPs. And ironically, a lot of UKIP supporters were exactly the people who voted against AV at the referendum, because at the time they were Tory supporters. You know, when the AV referendum happened, it's quite interesting actually, because we were obviously, well, the party didn't have a position, but my party was pro-AV. And people said to me, oh, but if you have AV, you'll just get that and not PR. We want to stay, you know, we want to go for PR. The reality, well, what I said to people and what has turned out to be true is if there was no vote for AV, then that would be taken as there is no appetite for electoral reform. And that's exactly what happened. So there is an appetite for electoral reform. I think the AV vote could have been won if people who actually really wanted it voted yes to AV. It's a sadly missed opportunity. I think there will be much more pressure for electoral reform after this general election, because it's almost certainly going to be minority government, and there'll be really annoyed people from UKIP and really annoyed people from us, from the Greens probably. Votes for 16-year-olds, yeah, definitely. As I say, I think I covered why I think that's a good idea. Other things like recall of MPs, I support. I don't think, I mean, maybe it's not entirely electoral reform or that side of things, but I think also that MPs shouldn't be allowed second jobs. I mean, there's a whole load of things we would do. We would reform the way the Commons and the Lords work. Well, we would get rid of the Lords largely. So does that answer your question, or have I just gone off on some tangent?
We'll move on to the next question, that's right. So I've now worked out how to use Twitter on this device. So you can tweet at us at Bath Uni Polsoc, or the hashtag Bath Decides. And you can tweet us any questions, and I'll read them out. So we'll have them from Twitter now, which is, do you see any merit in involving the private sector in the NHS, especially if it raises standards and improves patient care?
That's an interesting especially, isn't it? Because I'm not sure that's ever been proved to be the case. As some of you may know, that I am a governor at the IUH, so I represent all of you at the IUH. It's an elected position, so I get to see stuff and what's happening and the finances. And the single worst piece of legislation passed in the last 50 years, in my opinion, is the Health and Social Care Act 2012. Billions have been privatised from your NHS, billions, and nobody was asked. Your Prime Minister lied about it at the last election. Before the last election, he said no top-down reorganisation of the NHS. What happened? The largest reorganisation, top-down reorganisation of the NHS in history. People, if you're not angry about that, you should be, because actually, for that man to stand there and lie about it, and continue to lie about it, is outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous. And people are dying because of that law, those changes to the law. They are actually dying. Just down the road, I don't know if you saw in the news, there was a private company doing cataract operations in Somerset. They were brought in because they were cheap. After 3 days, the hospital stopped their operations because loads of people went blind. Company closed down, job done, NHS has to pick up the bill. That's the sort of thing you get. If the profit is the motive, then how can anyone who makes a profit undercut the NHS who doesn't make a profit? The only answer to that is either they pay people less or they somehow take shortcuts. I mean, that's the only answer, unless you can see any other way that they can do it. And we end up with ridiculous things. You might have also seen the news last week where a company owned by, I can't remember which MP it is, but there was an MP, it might have been Rifkind or somebody, but I don't want to libel him, and they put in a bid, it was £7 billion or 7 million, but 7 billion, I think, more than the NHS, and they got the contract. It's absolutely outrageous. If you look at the number of Tory MPs who have interests, financial interests in private healthcare, huge numbers of them, Lords and MPs, it's corrupt. It is corrupt. I don't think anyone who has financial interest in anything should be able to vote on any legislation that covers that area. You know, it's just this seems obvious to me. And when I walk into the hospital and I see we've got the worst waiting times now in living memory, you know, of the hospital at least. And we've got people queuing up in corridors and A&E and in ambulances because of the cuts, and there's not enough staff, and they haven't had a pay rise for 5 years. People leaving in droves to go and work in Australia, and who can blame them? And they're told constantly, you're terrible, work harder, work harder. And then there's people at the top sitting on all the cash. You know, companies like Virgin come in and run childcare services in Dorset and make a huge amount of money and cut everyone's pay. You know, it's absolutely outrageous. So, yeah, I get very angry about the NHS because I think this government is appalling, and this is why I will never forgive the Lib Dems for their complicity in it. They're as bad as the Tories. They didn't have to vote for it. They did it for their ministerial cars. No time for them anymore.
Okay, I think we'll move on to the next question then. Could we have the white jumper on the left column and then the grey jumper on the right? So Ellie, just down there. 3 rows of people up on your right. 2 more down.
Thanks. What would you propose to do, following on from the last question really, about mental health? Because obviously that's something that there's a lot of, the Lib Dems have claimed that they'll invest equally in mental health as physical health and things like that, but it's something that gets talked about a lot, but in reality there's very little action.
Well, what we would like to see is much more integration. I know everyone says this, so you could be forgiven to be being cynical. At the moment, they are talking about putting more money into mental health, but you have to remember that comes after years and years of cutting budgets. And the trouble with mental health is that things like social care budgets are really important, and yet you can stop a lot of people having to actually even enter the mental health care system if you make sure that their social care is all right, and that's been massively cut. So we would obviously put more money into these things. I mean, just to put it in perspective, not just mental health, but healthcare in general in this country, we're told it's unaffordable, but we put less in than the European average. I mean, we put in, we could put in another 0.8% of GDP to get us up to the international average. So we don't pay much money into the NHS compared to other countries, and yet it's pretty brilliant. Now, mental health gets an even smaller slice of that. So what we would do is actually get rid of a whole load of stuff that costs money that is pointless. We get rid of the internal market in the NHS, which is going to save absolutely billions. That can go to the front line. We'd put more money in as well, and what we'd do is integrate, and we genuinely would integrate primary secondary care and mental health and social care. Now, we actually have detailed policies about how that will work, but just in summary, we'd get rid of, we'd make everything much more localised, basically. So what we have now, and I won't bore people about the way the NHS works, but it's something called Clinical Commissioning Group that sits locally, and they have secondary care providers like hospitals and primary care providers like GDPs, and then there's mental health trusts and there's ambulance trusts, and they're basically these things are all meant to run as businesses, and they've all got budgets, and they've all got to worry about whether they're going to stay in the budget. It's all nonsense. It's all a completely contrived market that costs billions, that isn't going to healthcare. It's going to people basically. And I'm not going to diss bureaucrats, because my partner's an NHS manager, right? So I don't hate them. They're great. They do a good job. But actually, a lot of what they do is a waste of time. I mean, she has to do it because that's her job, and she does a good job. But she knows it's kind of an arbitrary, made-up thing she does. So that money should all be going to healthcare, to the actual thing that people want it to go to. So when it comes to mental health, your GP or your social workers or any outreach workers that the council employs should all have a common system of notes. I mean, at the moment, it's so hard for those guys to talk to each other because it's all siloed, because all these things are meant to make money, and loads of them have been sold off. That actually, a lot of these private companies, that's monetary value for them. They don't want to give those notes to people. I mean, this is completely the wrong way of thinking. It should be done for the patient. It should be done for people. It shouldn't be done for some market. I mean, again, I don't want to go on some rant about private healthcare, but people are missing out on care because of people worrying about money. What we should be caring about is pathways through. If you have lots of, like, I think a third of people have a mental health issue at some point in their lives, or something. It's a very high number. Some of those are quite minor, some are quite major. Your GP should be able to, or your social worker should be able to see your notes for everything, spot some of these trends, which they have to see everything. They've got to have a view of everything that's happened to you, hospital admissions, benefits, interactions with social services. It sounds a bit brick brotherish, and there'd be lots of safeguards to make sure that this wasn't used for bad, but for nefarious purposes. But in the end, you've got to catch these people before the problem gets worse. Because the earlier you intervene in anything, mental health especially, but also other health problems, the cheaper and easier and the better outcomes.
Thank you, Dom. I'll stop you there on that. Hi. So can the next question, please, which Elliot's just the gentleman to your left who got the microphone ready.
Sorry to go back to housing, but I'm just a bit confused by your policy, because you said the government has loads of land that you can build all your 500,000 houses on, but where is this land? Is it brownfield? Is it greenfield? If it's greenfield, it seems a bit contradictory to build all your houses on that as the Green Party.
It's almost all brownfield. Lots of it is older MOD. I don't know how well all you know the area around Bath, but there's big sites at Fox Hill, and there's one just outside, on the way to Corsham, and there's huge sites, and most of them have been unused for a long time. If you have government sort of strategic housing policy that says, we're not going to leave it to developers. We're going to build this housing in this density, to this design, in these places, and we're going to get on with it because this is what we need. You'd be surprised how much you can fit in what the brownfield sites we already have. Now, I'm not going to say that we definitely wouldn't build on greenfield, but the Green Party's policy is always build on brownfield, always use unused houses, always do all that first before you build on greenfield. Now, if it's somebody being homeless or having to build on some greenfield, we would build on some greenfield. But that would be the very last resort. Now, to put it into perspective, it does change a bit, but at the moment, there's around a million empty properties in the UK. And that's houses. So before we even talk about building, we've got a lot of stuff to fill. I mean, our figures actually take account of doing all that first. I mean, so really you're talking about a lot of people who need housing. For the other parties to come up and say, oh, we can't build that many, or we don't need to, or we're going to build some smaller number, where are they going to put all the people? But there's a multi-pronged approach. There's the building of new houses. There's the repurposing unused properties. Sometimes industrial units can be converted because they're designed, sometimes they can't, but we would look into doing all that sort of stuff where they've lain empty. We would also think about incentives for people to not have so many properties. Now, that's not building, but it's a way of freeing up all this stuff to be done first. So what I'm trying to say is we really, hopefully, wouldn't build on any greenfield, but we would if we had to.
Thank you very much. We'll now go on to a question from Twitter, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So this is from Helen Sanford. Your party wants to ban proactive recruitment of non-British NHS staff. Please can you clarify, as it sounds quite racist.
So what do we want to ban?
You want to ban proactive recruitment of non-British NHS staff?
No, we don't.
Well, whoever Helen is, that's a bad tweet. So we'll just go on to the next one then.
Oh, no, I'd like to answer it. I mean, I think where the confusion has arisen is what we don't like is at the moment, because there's so few nurses and doctors being trained. I mean, the RUH does this. It has recruitment drives in other countries where nurses are much cheaper. Now, we can't ban it. We don't want to ban it. But what we do want to do is train a lot more nurses and doctors here, because we don't think it's right that we can go in with all our relatively huge amounts of money to a poor country and just get all their nurses and doctors. That's not fair on those people. But what do we do about that? We don't just ban it. We train people up. So this wouldn't be an overnight thing. It'd just be we would generate the number of doctors and nurses we need. I mean, that would be our policy.
Thank you very much. We have another couple of questions on the floor now. So we'll have the guy in the red hoodie at the back, and then the guy in the green shirt at the front.
Hi. So I'm hopefully going to go into the job market in 6 months or so and start earning money. And my concern is about how we're going to sort of pay our debts as a country. And going forward, I've sort of heard Natalie Bennett speak a couple of weeks ago about how you're going to cost your policies, which doesn't fill me with a lot of confidence. But then kind of reading through the articles about your policies, it just seems, you know, we've got inheritance taxes, NHS taxes, income taxes, wealth taxes. I mean, I'm a bit concerned that I'm not going to be able to keep anything. But it just concerns me a bit.
I'm not going to lie to you. A lot of politicians will magically say that they're going to reduce taxes for everyone and then increase spending on everything. I mean, that's clearly nonsense. We are going to increase spending, and we're going to increase taxes on the people who've got the most money. I'm not going to beat about the bush. There are some very, very rich people in this country, very rich, and it's about time that they paid their way, is our opinion. At the moment, what's happening is the very poorest in society are being punished for the mistakes of the richest. Now, that's not fair. Is it fair that we tax people with lots of money a bit more? Well, I mean, you could say they don't think it's fair, but really they can afford it. And in the end, if this is absolutely critical that we pay off, I mean, we're not of the opinion that it's absolutely important that we pay off the debt entirely within 5 years or whatever the other parties are saying anyway, just as a starter. Because actually, economics, you know, Keynesian economics, you know, dictates that you can actually borrow money to invest. And actually, you can kickstart a lot of your economy by large public infrastructure projects or social housing, building social housing, or that sort of thing. Now, will you pay more tax under us? Well, if there was a Green government, if you earned the average salary that people earn now, the average graduate salary, then you would not pay more tax under us. Just to put it into perspective how skewed how much money people have is, I mean, I'm sure you all heard that the top, I think the top 1,000 richest people in Britain have as much wealth as the deficit or the national debt or something like that. I should probably know what that is before I say it. But I mean, basically, there are extremely wealthy people around. Now, can you get all their money? Of course you can't get all their money. It wouldn't be fair to get all their money. But what we are saying is just they can contribute a bit more. So we've got a wealth tax. We want to actually apply on the top 1% of people. We want to charge them an extra wealth tax where we can generate, probably not much, but it's the start of something. And we want to reform inheritance tax as well. And we want to start putting more bans on income tax, and we want to put more bans on council tax. In fact, we don't really want council tax, but in the short term, we'd put more bans on, put the council tax up for the largest houses. In the long term, we'd have a land value tax. So people would be taxed on properties they're not using, for example. So
closing remarks there. Like, sum up what you would say.
So in summary, you may pay more tax if you get very rich, but we would say that that is your debt to society.
Sorry, next question, please. Mr. Green shirt.
I wanted to ask about national security. So, right here.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, ask about national security, given the threat of terror, Russian aggression, perhaps, and how best to combat them, especially as you advocate trapping Strident and withdrawing from NATO. But crucially, also how to balance that with civil liberties and privacy.
Yeah, so as I've said, I mean, I don't know if anyone here could ever think of a situation where we'd ever use Trident, but our main objection to Trident is we would never use it. It's tactically useless, it's massively expensive, and it's kind of immoral, isn't it? Because that's as I say, when would you ever use it? The one time we have been attacked in a military way, rather than terrorism, the Falklands, nuclear weapons were useless. What were we going to do? Nuke Argentina? I mean, we just wouldn't. It was entirely pointless having those nuclear weapons. So we don't think that actually getting rid of Trident would make us any less safe. Now, Russia being aggressive, does Trident help us there? Not really. I mean, what are we going to do? Nuke Russia? I mean, we're not. I'm not sounding flippant, but nuclear weapons I just think are entirely irrelevant. Now, we do get some criticism about our other military policies. We want to reduce military spending, basically. At the moment, we spend a huge amount of money on the military for the size of the country we are, and it's not spent very sensibly. The biggest threat to this country, and I think it's a threat that's overplayed actually to a large extent, is terrorism. It's not a military attack by a foreign force. The stuff we buy is not helpful. You know, we buy lots of tanks and things, and, what are we going to do with those? I mean, the best thing we could do, and this is me speaking rather than the party, I think the best thing we could spend our money on is special forces, personally. I think they are the most useful thing we have. But that's just an aside, because I think what we should spend money. Having shiny aircraft carriers and multi-million-pound fighter jets that, air superiority fighters, for us, is entirely stupid. There's nobody who would ever attack us where those are useful. So some military spending cuts do not make us any less safe. How unsafe are we from terrorism? I think it's a massively overblown threat to some extent. I'm not in any way diminishing the bad things that happen and the people who are killed by terrorists. But realistically, there will always be a threat from terrorists as long as we're going around abroad telling people what to do and bombing people and that sort of thing. It's not that simplistic. Of course, you might get terrorists anyway. But what can you do about them realistically? If a guy wants to strap a bomb to his chest and stand in the middle of London and blow himself up, military spending doesn't really help. I mean, there's not much you can do apart from make us into a police state. So I would argue with anyone that says reducing military spending makes us less safe. It makes us less able to intervene, potentially, in wars like Iraq. Now, obviously, I don't agree with Iraq, but there could be a war that I do agree with. I would never say that never say never. And maybe it would be a shame if we couldn't send as many planes as we'd like to. But that hasn't happened for a long time. And really, why should we pay for any more planes than an economy of an equivalent size? I think all of the economies that can afford it, including ours, should definitely put people into UN sort of peacekeeping and that sort of thing. We should all put much more into that. That's what I'd like to see our military do, more than what they do now, which is generally rather be, they're misused, I think.
Thanks a lot. I'll have another 2 questions, please. So the blue jumper at the back, and then we have the white hoodie to the front.
I was just wondering if you whether you thought you would describe yourself as an international party or a national party, and if you describe yourself as a national party, if your policies could possibly function in such a highly globalised world.
That's a good question. One of the things that we do benefit from in many ways is that obviously there are green parties in almost every country where there are democracies. Having said that, some of them are quite different to ours. We are probably, of all the green parties, the ones who are most concerned with, I hesitate to say left-wing, I'd probably say socially progressive policies. Now, you can get quite right-wing green parties that care very deeply about the environment, but really don't care about poor people or whatever. There is common ground with some of those guys. Like, obviously, we all want to save rainforests and we all want to stop global warming and all those other things. So there is common ground. But so to say we're an international party could be misleading. We are, but I don't want to say that we are the same party in every country, because we're not. A good example is the Irish Greens, actually, who were in coalition with their government. I don't know if they still are. They certainly were recently. They are quite a lot more right-wing than we are. And we get people saying to us, oh, yeah, the Irish Greens did X, Y, Z. I say, well, they're a different party, really. I mean, we all agree that we don't like climate change and that sort of thing. But in the end, we're different parties. Where we do work together is in the European Parliament, where we have quite a large group. And we all agree on a lot of things. Environmental protection is obviously one of them. Animal welfare and things like TTIP, where we're all campaigning against TTIP. So we can work very well. When you elect a Green MEP, as we did in the Southwest, then you've got a very powerful MEP because they're part of a very active group. And in fact, 3 days ago, there was a poll that showed we are the most active group in the European Parliament and vote most. So actually, we're your best value MEPs. I wouldn't name parties who are worse.
We'll move on to the next question, that's all right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, you spoke about the minimum wage. I think you said you wanted to raise that to £10 an hour.
Yeah.
But what are the chances of that just increasing unemployment, where businesses, they can't afford to employ as many people?
Well, this is, of course, I don't know if any of you are old enough, because I can't even remember when it was, but when the minimum wage was introduced, full stop, can't remember exactly when it was, but just before it happened, there were lots of people saying, loads of people are going to lose their jobs, because companies won't be able to afford to pay people, whatever it was, £5 something an hour. When it happened, unemployment didn't go down at all. It's never say never, but £10 an hour by 2020 is not a significantly huge amount of money. I would say we've calculated that, you know, we say a minimum wage should be a living wage, as in everyone who has a full-time job should be able to pay for food and somewhere to live. I mean, that I don't think is it's not much to ask. If you, as an employer, can't afford to pay somebody enough to live on, then perhaps you shouldn't be an employer. You know, why should the state bail you out? That's what happens. So at the moment, if somebody needs some sort of state benefit to live, even though they've got full-time jobs, basically the taxpayer is subsidising that company. Now, I'm not against subsidising companies when there is a good reason to do so, but doing it because they can't, in some cases, be bothered to pay people enough when their senior members of staff get paid a lot, I don't think those guys should be subsidised. I think, you know.
So going back to the question, do you think it'll raise unemployment or lower it?
No, I don't think it'll raise unemployment.
I think we'll move to another question. We haven't much time left. So we'll have the red T-shirt, and then at the back, the sort of stripy shirt. Can't really see it from now.
So one of your...
Sorry, can you have the guy at the front first? Then
okay.
That's right, cheers.
Two things. The reason why an argument for Trident is that most powerful countries have nuclear weapons. So to be considered a global power, you have stuff like Trident. Although it's not my view, but like why Trident's a good thing. And also, obviously the Greens are known for their environmental policies. If you were to go into power, what would your dealings be with China and America that are the biggest culprits of emissions? Would you like stop trade or like stop relations and stuff like that?
Okay, I guess you're right about Trident. Just in summary, I mean, lots of people. I think that's why everyone who wants it because it's like a willy waving thing, isn't it? It's like, you know. Anyway, on your other point. There's only so much we can do within Europe, obviously, because Europe is a free trade area. So let's sort of park that because we can't really do much about those guys. America and China, I am not against import tariffs or trade, you know, different trade mechanisms for things that are things we don't approve of. And what we don't approve of can vary. So at the moment, we've got things like, you know, we ban animal imports for certain things, like parts of elephants and all that sort of thing. That's not controversial. Everyone agrees with that. What we would like to do, what I would like to see, is much more emphasis in trade talks on possible tariffs on things which are massively polluting, for example. So we don't have a free trade agreement with a lot of countries. We have free trade agreements, plural, with some of these countries on various things, but there's no compulsion on us to let them import everything they want without any sort of tariff. Why not have a tariff on things which massively pollute? I mean, ultimately, unless we want to all have a race to the bottom when it comes to environmental protection, we have to insist that places like America and China have the same environmental protection Europe does. Now, the only way we're going to do that is with trade, you know, duties or tariffs or anything, and it's got to be slow because it's not. They can't do it instantly, but that has to be the direction we push.
I think we have the next question then, please.
Okay, so earlier on you mentioned that Green MEPs have a great track record in terms of working with other parties and putting green policies into place in the European Parliament. And so I assume that they have supported some of the recent green policies, for example, those which limit the power of vacuum cleaners and also increase regulation. Why I say this is because I think some of the green policies which have come through the European Parliament are completely stupid, like limiting the power of vacuum cleaners, which mean people have to use them for longer, so ultimately there's no benefit in terms of the amount of power ultimately used. But also in terms of legislation,
that's right.
Sorry, I just want to say, what about in terms of legislation on business and the cost that businesses then incur as a result of green policies? Okay.
Okay, firstly, the vacuum cleaner thing is a favourite UKIP. Oh, isn't Europe terrible? Straight bananas, vacuum cleaners. It's completely untrue. Basically, what has happened in vacuum cleaners, the reason this legislation exists is because there's been like an arms race with people who make Hoovers where they keep saying, oh, they're 2 kilowatts, 5 kilowatts, whatever, like it's some amazing thing and that it needs that much power. It's nonsense. Any physicist can tell you you can make a perfectly good vacuum cleaner that doesn't use 3 kilowatts. I mean, absolutely possible. So all we're saying is, don't be ridiculous. Keep the power down to actually something that's perfectly good for a vacuum cleaner and end that arms race, because sometimes free market fans might not believe it, but the market is not very good at that sort of thing. You know, you really need legislation. As to your point about sort of red tape and environmental regulations, it's absolutely it is absolutely right that we have red tape and environmental regulations. There is some cost in business. There's a cost in business in businesses not being able to just dump all their rubbish in the river next to their factory, but we stop them. Some of these things, I mean, red tape, and it bothers me when you hear some certain parties say, oh, we're going to slash red tape, we're going to slash this, it's cost of business. Who cares about cost of business if it protects the environment or it protects the workers? You hear some parties saying, let's get rid of the European Working Time Directive. It's ridiculous that doctors can't have to work 60-hour shifts and then fall asleep and kill people. It's not ridiculous to any party to actually say they want to remove the Working Time Directive so doctors can work 60 hours plus are idiots, because people will die. These regulations are entirely sensible, and they've been made over years and years to protect you, to protect your rights at work, to protect your rights to paid holiday, to protect your rights to sickness, to protect your rights not to live next to a factory that spews crap into the air all day. These all exist for a very good reason. People don't make legislation for the sake of it. It's really, really painfully tedious to get legislation through the European Parliament. And so almost everything, I'm not saying I agree with all of it, but the environmental protection stuff, I agree with almost, well, I can't think of any I don't approve of.
Thank you. Well, one more Twitter question, then we'll have one question from the audience to wrap up. So the question from Twitter is, we spend more on our debt interest each year than on our military. How do you address that one?
I don't think spending on the military is a great yardstick. I mean, I'm not a big fan of spending on the military. I mean, it's bad that we spend lots of money on debt. Of course it is. We would like to reduce the debt. We don't think the way to do it is, for some reason, slash welfare payments. The way to reduce the debt is to tax people properly. The amount of tax that isn't paid in this country because of really interesting loopholes that allow Starbucks to pay the logo from the Netherlands and all. It's another old nonsense. Everyone knows it's just nonsense. It's just made up so people who have loads of money don't pay tax. You just need MEPs like ours that will just put an end to this. Don't just accept it. Just say, well, let's just sort it out. It's not inevitable that loads of rich people aren't going to pay tax. It's not inevitable if you do something about it. It's not inevitable if you vote for a party that says it's wrong. And the party that says it's wrong is the party that doesn't take the money from all these guys that pay them to make sure they don't pass laws to change it. There's such a apathy in the larger parties because that's where they know where their bread's buttered, right? They know where they're getting their money. We don't get that money. We're quite happy to take them on. We will take them on.
Thank you. Last question then. Could we have the green hat just to the back?
Yeah, this is a weird one to end on, I suppose, but I think it's quite important. Something I've read that the Green Party lean more towards is the decriminalisation of drugs use and treating it more as a health issue. I'm just wondering, if you were elected, is that something you would push for? Is that something you think the Green Party should stand for? And do you think that's important?
Fundamentally, the philosophy of our party is nothing should be illegal if it doesn't harm anyone else. That surprises people, but it's true. And we would decriminalise drug use. It is a health issue if you're addicted to it. It's much safer. I don't know how many people have seen this Drug Live stuff. I mean, it's in the news for some reason, but on Channel 4 are running this Taking Drugs Live programme, which is a bit weird, where basically they're saying, drugs, I mean, they have a graph, it's quite interesting, and the most dangerous thing you can take is alcohol, and everything else is less dangerous, like, heroin and crack and God knows what. And that is actually over a population, it's absolutely true. The government lets you buy alcohol, no problem. It doesn't let you buy, I don't know, just even grow your own marijuana and smoke it. And to my mind, and to the party's mind, there's absolutely no harm in that. We would like to see decriminalise drugs, and we would like to see drugs sold safely. We'd like to see people able to tell their doctors if they're on drugs without fear of being prosecuted. We want to see, if people are addicted, the best way to get them off addiction is to treat them quickly. And people aren't going to be willing to rush to their GP if they know they might get arrested if they do it. If you can just say to your GP, look, I'm having a bit of a problem. I've taken, I can't get off heroin, and the GP says, right, absolutely no, you don't have to worry about anyone judging you. Here's the program to get you off it. That saves the country lots of money and saves lives. And the chances of getting dodgy drugs that have cut God knows what, if it's all sold in licensed shops and there's tax paid on those drugs, isn't that better? It's pure. You're not going to die if you eat some guy who sells you something in a club. I mean, you just go to the chemist and buy your drugs. I mean, isn't that better?
Yeah, on that interesting note to end. I think we should give a massive round of applause to Dominic. Fantastic.